The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Beaches, cottages, picnics, and barbecue. Summer gatherings include good food, and here in Ontario, delicious and culture meet a vast world of culinary possibility. That's what we'll dish about all week with Chef Joseph Shawana, author and chef Joshna Maharaj, author and journalist Anne Huey, and food writer Marie Fitrion. Tonight, food, it's personal? That's next on The Agenda in the Summer.
All right, another confession. I am one of those people that I like going to the grocery store and like everything is wrapped up neatly. Oh. Even though I grew up in East Africa where my dad would like chase the chicken, grab it, and do the thing.
Deal with it,
yeah. But now I'm very much happy going into the grocery store and it's like nice and neat. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of us, our relationship with food really, really changed. Joshna, do you think that we as consumers have a good relationship with food?
No, not at all. Not at all. From a variety of perspectives. One, what we can afford is too much of a top priority, right? It shouldn't, what you can afford should not be the deciding factor in what you eat, right? What you need to eat should be the deciding factor in what you eat. But right now, it's basically what you can afford. And so that is, the relationship is not good. In fact, so much of what I have decided to do with my career is to help close the gap, right? I have this idea that right now, the level of literacy required to make good choices about what to put in your mouth is higher than it's ever been in human history, right? The amount that we have to know, cage-free, grass-fed, local, sustainable, you know what I mean? It's all because we've hit a critical mass, I think, of manipulation with the food system that we're like, wait, what is going on? And so to navigate all of that, because we have other options, I can go directly to farmers and buy things. You know, I'm not stuck only going to grocery stores. As Joseph talked about, there's other sources. But paradoxically, the resting level of literacy in people about food is perhaps lower than it's ever. We've never been this disconnected from our food system. And so that gap is alarming, right? If what the world requires us to have more than we've ever, but we actually have less literacy and understanding than we've ever had about our food, I feel like my role is to help and close that gap, right?
I just want to push back a little bit because I want to get all of your viewpoints on this. I used to live in the UK for a little bit, and when there are certain foods in the UK that I couldn't find. And here, when I go to the grocery store in Ontario, they're everywhere. Food with like specific food coloring. It seems as if consumers, it's like you need a degree to figure out what you should eat or shouldn't be eating. So do you think that's a part of the system? Like we can't like outdo the system?
That's exactly it. That's exactly piece. The amount of deciphering and decoding that we need to understand, right? Even just, I'm thinking about tandoori masala, right? The red in tandoori masala is all just red dye number whatever, right? It's not paprika, it's not anything. But finding that somewhere or finding, like I just make it myself. But the ubiquity of all of this is super, super challenging, particularly when we think about imported global foods, right? That really sort of exponentially builds all of that. So I think that that's all part of it, right? What is required of us to navigate this is massive, which is why we're like, I'll just have a Big Mac combo.
Joseph?
Yeah, there's a big disconnection between people knowing what food is and actually where it comes from. The biggest thing that I can say on this is a lot of people, especially the foodie people, would actually go to a farm-to-table dinner, right? And thinking that majority of the food that's on there is actually coming from a farm and learning about the farm. But in reality, I would say that most of that food is actually just coming from their suppliers, right? Then I really think that you should, what Joshna was mentioning about realizing that you can actually go straight to the farm and get the food yourself and just cut out the middleman, right? Go to the farmer, because they'll actually appreciate your business and they'll get to know you. And they'll tell you exactly what goes into the food to make it grow.
That's it.
Right? What goes into the ground. Instead of like getting these frozen peas and carrots in the grocery store that has all of these preservatives in it, go to your local farmer and they'll pick the ingredients for you. You could just do all the prep at home. Like everybody's big on meal prep. Why put all that time and effort into, and all that attention into buying all these, all of this like fruits and vegetables and all this protein that comes from different areas in a grocery store where they're buying from here, buying from there, and all so forth. Just go to the farmer and just prepare your food that you're actually going to prepare, if that makes sense, right? So if like peel the carrots, wash them, cut them, blanch them, put them in a bag and then put them in the freezer, right? Because you'll know exactly what goes in that versus what goes in your Green Giant.
Ingredient X.
Yeah.
I love
right?
that in theory, but in practice, I mean, I have
It's exhausting.
Two small kids.
It's very exhausting.
Like literally, don't just shame myself for a second. I will order sushi for myself for lunch, and I'll order 2 extra tubs of white rice, and I'll be like, "That's my rice that I'm gonna end up turning into something for my kids." Any shortcuts I can find to kind of ensure that I'm still a human being, getting my work done and my children while working from home. It's just that I'd love to go to the farmer's market or go to the farm directly, but I just don't have that time.
I think the pandemic has forced us all to question our relationship with food and with our food system in general. I think the pandemic did a bunch of interesting things. Obviously, at the start of the pandemic, it forced us all to have to learn, those of us who weren't already cooking at home, to have to do some more cooking from home. So I think that even that basic act of having to cook for ourselves, having to shop for ourselves, having to prepare meals for ourselves, that in itself for a lot of people was a huge shift and probably a very good thing. Obviously, with the pandemic, we also saw like massive supply chain issues. We saw, basically the entire system that we've relied on for decades to bring food into our grocery stores and to make, bananas available year round and strawberries available in January and whatever food we want, basically whenever we want it available this instant. That system collapsed because, all of the steps that were required, the trucks being driven, tens of thousands of kilometers every single day across borders, this just-in-time kind of just-in-time approach to food, it doesn't work when even one thing snaps, and we saw many things snap all at once, and so. There's a lot of questions around our food system, not just our individual relationships, but every single step of the system and whether or not that's going to remain sustainable for the future, because I think the last 3 years have definitely shown us the answer is absolutely not.
I'm enjoying this because I think it's important for all of us to interrogate where our food comes from and our relationship with food. Because being able to just go to the grocery store, we know there's a lot of neighborhoods in Toronto alone that don't have grocery stores. So even just being able to go to a farm is even more challenging. But throughout the pandemic, we heard about this idea of shopping local with the supply issues that you mentioned, et cetera. So Joseph, how can we support more local ingredients in that regard?
Just venturing out. I live just not too far from here, so when we first moved to the neighborhood, we walked around. We got to know the area, we got to know what's here, what's there, and to where to shop. We stay within a certain radius, I guess you could say, of where we live, just to shop locally as much as possible. But as an everyday consumer, especially here in Toronto, especially in those hard-hit neighborhoods, it's very, very difficult because a lot of the times they don't have the means of venturing out or going to a farmer or going to a farmer's market. Or paying the TTC fare to hop on the TTC, right? So a lot of them have to walk, unfortunately. And most of the time, what's in their neighborhood is like a corporate store that sells convenience foods, and that's pretty much their diet within that area. So it's very sad seeing that, especially when there's so much green space here in the city where we can actually have community gardens where communities can get together and grow their food locally. It won't be much, but they can get the idea of harvesting for themselves and planting. I think building a regenerative crop system in your own backyard is very beneficial, not only for you, but for your kids. Because then they see from seed to sprout to plate, right? So, and I think you can't get any more local than that. But it's very difficult for these marginalized communities to shop locally, especially when there's a big corporate store right at the corner where they can just walk to, and versus going to the little store that's on the corner selling fruits and vegetables.
I love that idea because I think we saw more like urban farms coming up during the pandemic and people learning how to grow. It's also a great thing to do with kids to show them like how it happens.
They love the dirt. They just
And like if you want them to eat that green thing, get them to plant that green thing, and they spend emotional connections over the months that it takes for the harvest. You know what I mean? For the harvest, and then once they actually tear that leaf and dress it up or whatever, it's a completely different experience.
But how do we address culturally appropriate ingredients?
Well, listen, we have farmers here who are doing incredible things, right? And it's twofold. We have farmers here who are doing incredible things, growing, non-indigenous crops on this land. But we're also making space for newcomer farmers to have access to land to grow, right? There's beautiful stories of South Asian farmers growing the red carrots that we need for certain things and the coriander and the chilies for South Asian food. But there's also beautiful stories of Southeast Asian immigrants farming. So the varieties of choy that we now see on farmers market tables, that is all blooming. Right? That is, there are gorgeous things happening on farms, and more. I'm delighted that I can buy a bunch of coriander for my green chutney from a local farmer, and not necessarily have to go to the Indian market to pick that up.
And it's not even necessarily new. I mean, I grew up in BC, and many of the farms surrounding the Lower Mainland have for a very long time been South Asian farmers, have been East Asian farmers. There's a long history of agriculture, farming, and immigrant communities in this country.
Marie, I wanted to come to you because you previously mentioned in our one of our conversations about voodoo haggis, and that's your moniker.
It's so good.
Can you break that down a little bit more for me?
Yeah, so essentially I'm taking sort of like the history and the culture and the foods from both Scotland and Haiti and sort of fusing them together to kind of create a new narrative, because much to what Joshna was saying earlier, which is cooking is this very human experience. Another thing that we do that's very human is we tell stories. And so all the stories that we tell through food, what does that look like when we marry those histories together and we sort of push them together for third culture or individuals like myself who are interracial as well?
You know, when I was growing up in East Africa, we ate mostly a vegetarian diet. Meat was reserved for special occasions, especially at Christmas. Right. And women didn't have as much meat as the men. But I digress, not bitter. But, you know, we live in a time when we're talking about if you want the best food, you should be eating organic. And if you go to a grocery store, any grocery store, organic food is always more expensive. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that. You know, organic, I think, started out with the best intentions, but now it feels as if it's actually created another level of inequity.
Yep. It's this really... I learned this lesson a lot when I was working at The Stop, which is a community food center, and I would cook lunches for folks. And listen, it's important to note that the lunches that we served were generally the only meal that these folks had in the day. So I had to pack it with as much good food as we possibly could, right? And to perhaps break the cycle of curiously perishable, non-perishable food. But I realized that it was offensive to suggest to somebody who doesn't have enough money to buy any food that what they should be focusing on is organic food, right? It isn't like it's just, and I was like, I need a new way to do this, right? We need to forecast an ideal, because everybody everywhere on this planet should be eating food that was grown without a blanket of petrochemicals on the land close to them, right? So everybody should be eating local organic food. But we all understand there are many, many, many systems that stand in the way of all of that. Plus, organic titling does not tell you what I think all of what you need to know about the food, right? It doesn't tell you where it came from. And oftentimes we see organic, and that just means that it hasn't been sprayed with pesticides. but they don't tell you about the working conditions of the folks there. They don't tell you about about how energy is used on that farm, or whether it's a vast monoculture that essentially, you know what I mean? Even though they're not spraying with chemicals, that's still growing that way is a harmful way. It's not a sustainable way to treat the land, right? Plus, a lot of our organic stuff now is imports. Right, and I will argue that the health benefits that you think are happening from your organic food are being canceled out by the fact that all this food is picked before it's ripe and it's ripening on a truck to make the journey, right? So the title is a problem now, right? And we need to rethink all of this.
I'd pick local over organic any day.
I do too.
In terms of, like you said, it's basically a marketing certification, right? And it's an expensive certification.
Yes.
Not all of the crops can be certified organic. I know honey is one of those really funny ones.
Right.
There's only like one organic honey vendor here in Canada, I believe, and it's because you have to have certified all of the land within a 5-kilometer radius of that. The beehive, because I mean, you can't be like, no bees. You can't go and can't pollinate on a flower that isn't organic, but that's essentially what's required. So it's a lot of red tape, and it's not always accessible for the farmer as well. So I think what's better is if you ask the farmers or you ask people, what are your practices? How are you treating the land? Your workers, that's a big, big one. Migrant workers, we had huge problems with that last couple of years. I think that that's more important than just being like, organic sticker, we're done.
I think it just speaks to this confusion that's come up a few times already with consumers and food. You know, we talked about Michael Pollan's book 20 or so years ago now. We talked about, well, we haven't talked about, but the internet, of course, has fueled this whole other discussion around food. And so there's just all this noise around food, you know, sustainability, worker treatment, GMO versus non-GMO, gluten-free, non-gluten-free. And I think
Vegan
people are just,
stuff,
people
like all of it.
don't know all the time. They don't always know where to go, and they're just looking for a shortcut. They're looking for an easy answer because most of us don't have time to be sitting at home and Googling and researching every single thing. I was until recently a full-time food writer, and even I would sometimes often feel overwhelmed at the choice. And so we're just looking for easy ways to approach our food, and I think that's where the organic thing really kind of flourished. But yeah, there's definitely been a lot of issues and questions around that shortcut.
Joseph?
The whole organic moniker, it's complete rubbish, basically, right? So there's a lot of misconception out there of just because it's organic, it's good for you, right? So my culture ate a lot of, I guess, what they would label as organic food these days, right? So we were eating paleo before paleo was cool. Right. That's what I like to say that because it's true. We lived off the land, we lived off the terroir where we were. And we see this resurgence back home of the youth wanting to go and learn this stuff again, learn living off the land, learning how to harvest something properly and sustainably. Something that I wish we can do in a more vast area especially in the education field, where we can teach these upcoming chefs how to select the best ingredients to have a sustainable future. Right? Instead of just going with a trend. That's whatever's on TikTok or YouTube or whatever it is. I think that they have to redesign the organic structure because it's a very hard certification and very, very expensive to get. We have, me and my wife, we have some friends out just north of Cornwall, and they just got certified organic. But they had to do so much work to be certified organic.
Hoops to jump through.
And they couldn't produce any food through that whole time. Right. They couldn't do anything, so
it's
they
like
lost
3 years almost that it takes, right? For this.
They lost so much revenue, and
because you mentioned foraging before, right? But there are all these like regulation bodies, I guess, that say that you can do this in the food space, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that there needs to be a bit more diversity within those regulations?
Yeah. Yeah, so rightfully, very much so.
Enthusiastic.
Yes.
As an Indigenous person, I can't serve, and I can't serve our traditional foods in my restaurant. Right? It's a big no-no.
Because?
because it's more organic meats versus a commercialized meat. And the biggest takeaway that I got back from when I did a call with the Ministry of Natural Resources, because they're the ones that would actually make that call, that you can do this, right? They said, we don't know what that animal ate, so we can't keep it in the same fridge as a beef that's pumped with so much antibiotics and hormones. So they can't even be kept in the same fridge, right? And I'm not even allowed to have 1 ounce of it in my restaurant.
What is it? What is it?
Meat.
Meat. Any kind of meat.
Like caribou or something.
Yeah,
Caribou or
yeah.
like
If it's caught in the wild, because they don't know what is consumed. They're eating everything that.
There's like a game meat certification that you need to have game meat in your restaurant as well, and all kinds of.
It's very tricky, and it's very frustrating, especially when we've been put down for so long, that having something like that, having a restaurant that is serving, for better lack of the terms, an authentic indigenous food, will be a big game changer, because we can actually say, like, I'm going to this restaurant because I never had moose meat since I was a kid.
Yes.
Right? Or I haven't had like Wally caught like caribou since I was a kid. Or this type of fish that I had never had when I was a kid. So having that, I guess, certification, it's not, I don't like the term certification, but because it's just like the whole organic thing, it's a complete mess right now. And I think it all needs to change. There has to be people at the table, like farmers, who've been through the certification process now, and versus chefs and harvesters. All of these people should be at the table, not government officials appointed at the head of the table, because they don't know the whole process, right? I guarantee you, they grew up in Toronto, or they grew up in a very city setting, or close to a city, where they don't know that aspect of the true meaning of being a farmer.
Yes.
Or, right? So it's very hard.
It feels like the same problem that we were talking about earlier with the street meat, or the street vendors and such. It's like, by having that sort of the blanket commercialization, we're all going to do the same thing. We're all going to have a hot dog stall. We're all going to have relish on the right, mustard on the left, and we're all going to have the same meats. It's all of that comes, I think, from a place of like anxiety, and dare I say also racism.
Deep xenophobia to some degree, right?
We are creating these scenarios where it's like, well, we're not quite sure what they're eating. Well, okay, what are they eating? They're out in the wild. Like, they're not walking the streets of Toronto. We're not talking about raccoon here. We're talking about,
exactly.
Right? So there's a little disconnect there when, yes, officials aren't necessarily the people who should be making that decision, because they aren't chefs. They're not dealing with this food. They don't have necessarily that information. They're doing it from a place of anxiety.
Their experiences and
their anxiety and public safety.
And public health anxiety is the piece, right? It was only when I went up to Nunavut myself and was cooking at a geology camp, awesome circumstances, but a dude came by, a local hunter, and brought me some caribou. Right? And I made a caribou carpaccio, and I made a caribou curry. And I was delighted that, you know what I mean? I got to play with this stuff and use my sort of cooking mentalities on this, and they were both wildly delicious. And everyone was like, what? They were like, we recognize this, but we don't recognize this, right? And that's like, I want more of that, right? I want more of that sharing.
We only have a few minutes left in this segment, but I have to touch on this, because I think we also live in a culture where people have vegetarian diets. A lot of cultures have vegetarian diets from time, but people are turning to vegetarian and vegan diets. And some of the things that I've seen is there's a little bit of shame if you don't adopt those diets. So, because they're not exactly accessible to everybody.
No.
I just wanted to get your viewpoints on that.
I feel like I have lots to say, but I want to hear what others have
I
to
mean,
say.
I ran a catering company for 10 years, and most of my clients were vegan, vegetarian, and I actually thought it was the opposite. I think a lot of the shame actually came, they would express, hey, I wanted to have a vegan wedding, and you're the only caterer who didn't make fun of me.
Wow, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this was very, very common practice. Or like, thank you so much for not just being like the veg option, for not othering me within what I wanted to have. So my experience has been quite literally the opposite of that, where people have sort of expressed the, but yeah.
Anyone else?
I think there's definitely, with the popularity of like veganism and vegetarianism recently, like there's definitely a market that exists where these things can cost more. If you want to go somewhere and you want to buy I'm not going to say a brand, but the vegan brand burger or the vegan kind of branded specialty items, or go to the vegan restaurant, yes, you could be paying more, but I think that can still be a choice. I think that there are ways to eat vegan and not have to pay a premium on it. It's just all in how you approach it. Things like lentils and pulses and those foods have always been some of the most economical things to cook.
Should more of us be adopting vegetarian, vegan diets?
Okay.
I like the way she said okay.
Yes, in the sense that we all, I think, consume too much meat. Like the rate of meat that we consume is not sustainable. So embracing vegetables is going to be a key piece. What I do not want is this notion that there is somehow moral superiority in vegetarian and vegan eating, right? And that comes with that, right? There's this notion that we should all not consume anything that is animal connected, right? Which is like, I need to push back against that. I insist that there's a very sustainable, ethical way to consume animal products, right? There's a way to do it, right? And the distinction that I believe is not being made is that we collectively need to turn away from factory farmed meat. No question, right? The role of industrialized meat is a plague on this planet, right? That needs to stop. But we cannot sweep up everything. Like, you know what I mean? It's really important to carve out some space for the fact that there is a respectful, ethical, responsible, environmental way to consume animals. And it requires more thinking and talking.
Well, that wraps up our fourth discussion. Tomorrow is our final piece with you all. I can't believe this is my job. This is amazing. So tomorrow we're going to talk about what's the best way to have food. Should we focus on fun or nutrition, or is there room for both things? So our conversation continues tomorrow. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks.
Our guests all this week are
Joseph Shawana, Executive Chef at Kokum on Manitoulin Island. Joshna Maharaj, chef and author of Take Back the Tray. Anne Huey, reporter at the Globe and Mail and author of Chop Suey Nation. And food writer Marie Fitrion, who's also program manager at the nonprofit Foodpreneur Lab.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.